The early to mid 2000s were a very interesting time in gaming. I think you could even make a strong case that it's the most diverse and creative the industry has ever been. I mean, from platformers to RPGs to first-person shooters to racing games to open-world games and etc., there was just a large representation of genres, even in the AAA space. Styles varied a lot too. Not only was there a combination of sprites and 3D polygons still being used, but they were utilized across a variety of dimensions from 2D to 2.5D to 3D as well. It was a magical time and most developers were still going for style over realism. Bottom line, there was just a lot of diversity and experimentation in this era of gaming and it was awesome. All that being said, when I think of this generation, one style in particular comes to mind. Cel-shading. It's the topic of this video after all. What did you expect? If you're not familiar with what cel-shading is, I could just show you some clips and be like, well, it's this, but it's not actually that simple. A lot of people seem to think that cel-shading is just anything with a cartoony look and a thick black outline, and that is not the case. Admittedly, I used to think this too. I would incorrectly refer to Borderlands as being cel-shaded. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's got a gorgeous art style, but cel-shaded it is not. Cel-shading doesn't use shading gradients like most other games. Instead, shadows are depicted by drawing single-colored flat cells separated by distinct borders. Okay, you know what? Maybe it is just easier to show you. Look at these two models. Notice how the Borderlands character, despite having a cartoony look, has more realistic looking shadows with how it transitions from light to dark, whereas Link on the other hand has more of a sharp distinction between his shadows and the shading remains the same color all the way through. That's cel-shading. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Hi-Fi Rush, and Bomb Rush Cyberpunk are some of the latest games to utilize this technique. And yeah, no surprise, they look incredible. In my opinion, I think cel-shading just gives games such a timeless look. I don't think it's a stretch to say that a lot of cel-shaded games aged better than many of their peers from back in the day. Visually speaking, of course. The games that went for realism didn't look so real when better hardware was released. When you go for style though, now that can hold up forever. This is best showcased by the earliest cel-shaded games aging beautifully. Like man, I think we all owe Shigeru Miyamoto an apology. When Wind Waker was initially revealed, people were not happy. Coming from the more dark and mature Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, yeah, fans weren't having it. Honestly, I was one of these people. You see, I was like 10 years old at the time, dude. I didn't want something aimed at kids. I wanted something dark and gritty aimed for adults. Luckily, Nintendo didn't listen to us and was like, okay, you guys are idiots, just trust us on this, and yeah, thank God we did. Visually, the game has aged spectacularly, and to many people, including myself, the visuals are even the best part. To this day, it's still one of the prettiest looking Zelda games. The cel-shading hate was real though, as unfortunately, it's also one of the worst selling ones. At the time, we just didn't see the vision of the Shig Man, and it's a shame. To be fair, I think a lot of this has to do with the character design itself and not necessarily how cel-shading was used, as people were a lot more receptive to Breath of the Wild, for example. But the point I want to make is that cel-shading can just give games so much style and can make them age so well. Wind Waker was obviously not the first cel-shaded game though. Some of the first games that looked like they were cel-shaded were Dr. Hauser, Mega Man Legends, and Fear Effect. However, technically, these are not cel-shaded. They just look like it. I don't know enough about the technical aspects to explain them to you, but from everything I've read online from people that are smarter than me about this, yeah, I guess it's not actually cel-shading. Probably did influence it though. I incorrectly called Fear Effect cel-shaded in our video about PS1 pre-rendered backgrounds, so I wanted to rectify that. But yeah, the first actual cel-shaded game was none other than the absolute classic Jet Set Wacky Races. Yeah, everyone always credits Jet Set Radio as being the first cel-shaded game ever, but I don't know, everything I read online seems to point to Wacky Races beating it by a couple days. Hell, technically it tied for second as Slap Happy Rhythm Busters came out on the same day. That one was a PS1 game as well. I don't think anyone was clicking on this video to hear me talk about Wacky Races though, so yeah. Jet Set Radio was definitely the first game to popularize the true cel-shading technique. The game already had tons of personality, and the unique cel-shading style just amplified that. It was influenced by games like Parappa the Rapper with the hip setting and the cartoony comic book look. However, it transformed that vibe into something different and 3D. The combination of this vibe with the cel-shaded style just give this game such an incredible atmosphere. I think the cel-shaded look perfectly complements that cool, stylistic feel they were trying to give to Tokyo. It's like they had this vision and just executed it flawlessly. The funky, groovy soundtrack obviously plays a pretty big role too, but yeah, it's not a video about music. Man, I could just go on all day about this game. It's definitely one of the vibiest vibes around. While the original came out on the Dreamcast, Sega did reimagine it for the Xbox with Jet Set Radio Future. This is probably the version more of you played, considering the Dreamcast wasn't necessarily a huge seller. Everything I just said about that one applies here too though. Actually, even more so as Future looks a lot better. It just drips in atmosphere. The cel-shaded style just really captures that Y2K feel the game was going for. Cel shading in general will just always remind me of this era, so I wanted to show it some love in this video. I'm gonna showcase a variety of really cool looking cel-shaded games from this generation across multiple genres. I'm not gonna go into detail about the games themselves, I'm just gonna admire the cel shading style. Since the video is about early cel shading though, I am gonna limit it to the Dreamcast, the GameCube, the Xbox, and the PS2. Yeah, sorry No More Heroes fans, today is not your day. Also, I'm not gonna talk about Jet Set Radio or Wind Waker again because, yeah, I just did. Alright, before we get into it more, let's cue the intro.
The light is your guide.
Dream is what keeps you going.
Now is the time to shape your story. Your fate is in your hands.
Okay, let's start this off with a game that I think has the prettiest cel-shaded style from the 2000s, Okami. Granted, it was a really late PS2 game and even came out the same year as the PS3, so yeah, it makes sense why it looks so damn good. Okami is all about Japanese folklore and mythology, so to replicate this, they try to style the graphics after ancient ink wash paintings. Both character models and environments have extremely thick black lines. It's not all a uniform thickness either, as the width does vary, much like the actual ink wash paintings are styled after. To further double down on this aesthetic, you can even interact with certain objects and environments by using an ink brush with various techniques. It's really cool. What's also cool is the effects from interacting with objects, like breaking a vase or something, will have like a cel-shaded look too. The game just has so much style, dude, it's amazing. It received critical acclaim when it came out and is still one of the top 2 Zelda-like games I've ever played, next to Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. If there's one thing to take away from this video, play Okami. It feels like you're playing a painting the whole time and it's just a dazzling sight to behold. Clover Studio, the company behind it, also a subsidiary of Capcom, was no stranger to cel shading. In fact, it was like all they had made so far. Their first game was Beautiful Joe, and yeah, I probably should have started with that one, but I don't want to go back and change it now. This is another one that when I think of cel shading, this is one of the first games that comes to mind. I mean, it's not hard to see why. Just look at this.
Head to the go-go, baby!
The game just oozes style. Given that you play as a superhero, super Sentai dude, the whole stylized comic book-like look just works so well. Actually, I guess in this case, instead of a comic book, the game takes place in an old Sentai movie. When you're playing as regular Joe instead of Beautiful Joe, there's this old grainy film effect to show this, and it's pretty cool. Despite the 3D character models, the gameplay plays out in 2D, which is pretty unique for cel-shaded games. The game reviewed very well and sold enough to get a sequel. That one also reviewed well, but unfortunately it didn't really sell. Come to think of it, a lot of early cel-shaded games didn't really sell that well actually. Okami didn't sell very well either. Critics would always praise the art style, but I guess that didn't translate to more sales. The greater public apparently just wasn't ready for the vibes yet. Beautiful Joe had a pretty wacky premise, but it wasn't the only wacky cel-shaded game Capcom was making around this time. Just look at Under the Skin. What the hell is going on here? You play as a little alien dude who can transform into various humans, all with different abilities, and yeah, it is just one weird game. You see what I was talking about earlier when I said how this era had so much diversity and creativity? You would not see a AAA developer make a game like this these days. Plus, unless you're Resident Evil, Street Fighter, or Monster Hunter, Capcom doesn't really care about you anymore. Hell, they don't even care about Mega Man now. Speaking of, Mega Man X Command Mission. This was an RPG spin-off of the X series, so a spin-off of a spin-off, and it had a really stylish, cel-shaded look. The presentation is just so cool. As someone whose favorite genre is turn-based RPGs and who also has Mega Man X in their top 5 games of all time, I remember being super hyped for this game. Unfortunately, it's kind of mediocre if I'm being completely honest, but hey, at least it looks cool as shit though. What also looks cool as shit is Auto Modelista. Yeah, another Capcom game, but dude, they just had such a firm grasp on cel shading. In our separate videos about pre-rendered backgrounds and full-motion video cutscenes, I said how Squaresoft was the king of those in the 90s. However, when it came to cel shading in the 2000s, Capcom definitely took that crown. Auto Modelista has a gorgeous look that has aged incredibly well. The vibrant colors really pop out and look so damn good. Unfortunately, the game is kind of a case of style over substance though. There's not a whole lot of content here and the controls just don't really handle that well. Yeah, I know, it's like your one job as a racing game. That's like making a platformer where it doesn't feel good to move and jump. Very pretty game to look at though. Okay, the last Capcom game I want to talk about is Killer 7. This is like cel shading in its purest form. There's no way I couldn't talk about it. Everything in this game is cel shaded, not just characters or objects. As an actual game, Killer 7 is a very creative and surreal experience where you play as a dude with a multiple personality disorder, each of those 7 personalities being a killer assassin you can physically transform into. Hence the name, Killer 7. Yeah, it's weird as hell, but it's also really awesome. It's a very dark and heavy game with the occasional wacky, batshit humor, so for a title as unique and experimental as this, I feel the extremely unique graphical style perfectly fits. Seriously, for anyone that's played this game, they're gonna say it's one of the most unique games they've ever played. Because of its uniqueness, it was very polarizing. It seems like people either thought it was a surreal, political, subversive masterpiece, or just a confusing, chaotic mess. Regardless of where you stand, I feel you gotta respect the vision. Suda51 definitely deserves his name next to other guys like Hideo Kojima and Yoko Taro for just crafting these super deep and abstract experiences. The No More Heroes series did achieve some decent popularity, but even still, he never really broke into that mainstream success. Instead, his titles are more regarded as cult classics, Killer 7 being a perfect example. While we're talking first-person shooters, let's talk 13. This is literally first-person shooter, the comic book. And I mean that in other ways than just a cel-shaded style. While other cel-shaded games look like a comic book, 13 really makes you feel like you're playing one. Comic book panels pop up for items and for headshots. It uses onomatopoeia for various sounds and effects. And the UI in general is just completely styled after a comic book. 13 definitely deserves some credit for taking the cel-shaded style and designing the whole aesthetic of the game around it. But yeah, other than that, I don't have much else to say here. It's just a very stylish, cool-looking game that stood out amongst its peers thanks to cel shading. Alright, let's switch it up from a first-person shooter to a third-person shooter with Drake of the 99 Dragons. Every game in this video has been real quality so far, up until now. This is infamously considered to be one of the worst video games of all time. I mean, the Xbox version has a 22 on Metacritic. It's just a glitchy, broken-ass mess. I think there was a strong vision here. Execution-wise, it just fell extremely short though. All that being said, I think the cel-shaded visuals don't actually look that bad. I mean, they don't look amazing, but I can at least appreciate the style they were going for. It's the literal one redeeming factor of the game. not every game is a good game, or even an average game. However, there's usually at least one positive you can take away from it. It's all about seeing the good in things, you know?
Finally, I have a chance to change my destiny.
But you're full of surprises. Well, that's something then. Right, I'm in.
Let's talk RPGs. A lot of these use a form of cel shading, but not really full-on cel shading. Like I used to think Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2 use cel shading, but I guess on more research they use something more called dynamic shading? I don't know, it still looks really cool to me though, so I wanted to point these out. I think Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter used something similar, but yeah, I'm just not too crazy about this look. Or the overall game, for that matter. What had a much stronger cel-shaded look to me was Wild Arms 3. Again, I don't really think this is true cel shading due to how the shading looks, but I don't really care. I'm not a stickler or purist, I just want to admire cool games. It's just the characters and enemies that are cel shaded here, not the environments, but I still really like the style. The cel shaded look in combination with the Wild West aesthetic just make this RPG feel incredibly unique. Tales of Symphonia also uses cel shading for the characters, but not the environments. What these lack in coolness and style, they make up for in charm. It's got kind of this chibi look to it, but it's juxtaposed by a serious story. Like you might look at these graphics and think it's going to be a very kiddie and lighthearted game. Not really. I mean, it's cozy for sure, but lighthearted, not always. The first hour of the game has you visiting a human slave ranch, so yeah. I've always liked the contrast between brighter visuals and darker themes. Anyway, a lot of RPGs from around this era did the whole cel-shaded characters and enemies but 3D environments thing. The company Level 5 was the king of this. Dark Chronicle was the first time they attempted this, and similar to Tales of Symphonia, it's kind of got like this cuter and sort of chibi-esque look. It's got some charm for sure, but I do like their later cel-shaded models better. Like Dragon Quest VIII, dude? Holy shit, this looks so good. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a sucker for Toriyama, so seeing his art style depicted here, it's just really cool. The difference from the last entry was pretty absurd to say the least though. Look at Dragon Quest I and Dragon Quest VII. Now look at Dragon Quest VII to Dragon Quest VIII. Yeah, pretty crazy, right? This was the only game in this extremely long-running franchise to use cel shading, which just makes it stand out. It also happens to be my personal favorite in the series. Coincidence? Yeah, probably actually. It's just a really good game, even aside from the visuals. Their last PS2 RPG, Rogue Galaxy, had an excellent look as well. I just love how creative all the character designs are. It doesn't have the Toriyama style, but style is definitely still there. I mean, this has gotta be one of the prettiest games on the PS2. However, I think the RPG from this era with the strongest, purest cel-shaded style is Musashi, Samurai Legend. Look at those thick-ass black outlines, dude. It's kind of excessive, really, but it does give it a distinct style. The extremely Nomura-esque character design plays a big role with this too. For those that don't know, that's the Kingdom Hearts guy. He's all about highly stylized looks and crazy fashion choices, and when given full creative freedom, he gives us designs like this. Easily one of his most Nomura designs ever. Unfortunately, the game is kind of compared to its predecessor, but hey, at least it's stylish as hell. Since Musashi is part action RPG, part platformer, let's talk actual platformers now. Klonoa 2 has cel shading for its characters and bosses, and these look really good. Again, it's not like pure cel shading, but rather a more subtle version. It's mainly most noticeable in cutscenes though. Gameplay is a little zoomed out, so it's hard to fully appreciate sometimes. This is another one that surprisingly deals with some heavier and sadder themes despite the brighter and cuter visuals. Stuff like overcoming grief and sorrow and things of that nature. It's just a phenomenal game all around. Bomberman Generation and Bomberman Jetters have some charming cel shading too. Bright colors, cute look, and what's not to love. By the way, I know these games aren't like platformers, but yeah, it's obviously the most fitting section for it. What definitely does fit here, however, is Sly Cooper. I gotta be honest, as a Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank guy growing up, I actually didn't play this until recently. And let me tell you, I'm pretty mad at myself for waiting this long. These games are incredibly fun and have so much style. The cel shading did a great job to separate it visually from Jak and Ratchet. They really lean into the comic book look as well. Chapter introductions will have like this comic book aesthetic, which just makes the whole visual style feel very cohesive. The art direction is just phenomenal all around. Alright, this next genre I'm not going to harp on too long and just want to give a quick shout, and that's fighting games, specifically anime fighting games. Yes, if you were a popular anime in the 2000s, there's a very strong chance you had a cel-shaded fighting game. I'm not going to list these all, but yeah, there's just so many of them. This next one isn't a fighting game by any means. It's a monster raising simulation where you do fight other monsters one-on-one, but yeah, I didn't know where else to throw it in. Monster Rancher 3 though. I don't really have much to say here, it's just a really charming style. You know how everyone has those really obscure games or series they were super into as a kid for some reason, even though they were never really that popular? Monster Rancher is one of those for me. I just have so much nostalgia for it, so I gotta show it some love whenever I can. This is another one I didn't really know where to throw in, but yeah, let's talk Cell Damage. It's a vehicular combat game similar to Twisted Metal, just with way more of a cartoony look. I mean, the cars physically bend when they turn, they really embrace that cartoon aesthetic. The game even takes place in a fictional cartoon of the same name. I always just thought this game had a really visually pleasing style. It's just so wacky and charming. I love it. Super fun game for multiplayer too. Alright, let's end this video with another defining trait of the early 2000s gaming landscape. Extreme sports games. Janya Cabalista tried to fuse the styles of both Tony Hawk and Jet Set Radio and kind of failed miserably. Well, visually it actually looks pretty cool, it's just unfortunately it controls like complete ass. I mean, it's got such a cool aesthetic just to be bogged down by horrendous gameplay, it kinda sucks. Let's end things on a more positive note though. It's juice and jam time, baby. Go-Go Hyper Grind is maybe the most early 2000s type of game in this entire video. From the cel-shaded visuals to the pop-punk soundtrack, it just bleeds Y2K. The art design was actually done by Spumco, the studio behind Ren and Stimpy. Yeah, it's no wonder the game has incredibly strong style. The character designs are so cartoony and creative and unique, and it's just awesome. All the slapstick effects really hammer in that cartoon feel as well. You know, I think my favorite thing about all the games in this video is they just aspire to be unique and do something different. Similar to the anti-establishment themes in Jet Set Radio, they wanted to go against the industry norms and stand out in some way. And they absolutely succeeded. These games do stick out amongst their peers and have made a lasting impression on me. Hell, even the ones that aren't really that good, I can still at least appreciate their visual style and the vision they were going for. I know I'm not the only one either. There's been a lot more games popping up on the scene lately that take clear inspiration from these early cel-shaded titles, and I think that's pretty damn cool. Maybe not always from a gameplay standpoint, but from an aesthetic standpoint, to me, these games are absolutely timeless. If they try to be like every other title out there, they might have gotten lost in the mix, or been forgotten with time. Because they aim to be different and create something unique though, that's how they were able to stand the test of time and leave a lasting impact on the industry.
Jam it hard, yeah. Hype it up all once again.
that about wraps up this video. Thanks for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please either consider hitting that like button or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. What are your feelings about cel shading? And what are some of your favorite early cel-shaded titles? There's obviously way more out there that I didn't mention, but I try to talk about a lot of the more popular ones and some of my personal favorites. By the way, I didn't talk about this too much earlier because I wanted to focus on visuals, but yeah, basically every game I talked about in this video, barring a few exceptions, has an insane soundtrack. When looking up music to play in the background, I was continuously impressed. I've been vibing out to this shit for a few weeks now, dude, chilling at home, driving in the car, gym sessions, you name it. Love finding new bops, you know? As always, just want to give a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters, and of course an extra special shout out to our top patrons, Chris Carnaccio, Derek Drost, Jesse Spencer, Jump Rock, and Saina. All of your support and generosity is very much appreciated. Other than that, thanks again for watching, everyone, and hope you have an awesome day. This is Corbin from Gaming Productions. Until next time.